A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
After nearly a year of abstaining from American politics, Elon Musk surprised the world with a bold claim about America's recent attacks on Iran. This happened right after the first confirmed attacks on February 28th. And though the U.S. military says these attacks are precautionary,
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs also saying that the operation would expand inland. I thought that was significant, something we have been hearing about for the last day.
Elon argues that the real reason was political pressure from foreign allies. Which nations are influencing these attacks? And do we have evidence to support this claim? Join us as we examine his view through current events and military history to uncover the real reasons behind America's recent attacks. The attack that shocked the world. On February 28, 2026, at about 6 a.m. on a quiet day, the region of Tehran, Iran was hit by the launch of the United States military operation Epic Fury. This was a coordinated attack by Israel and the United States, with the first wave of strikes hitting other key cities as well, including the strongest points of Iran's military and political command. These were places where senior officials worked, and the Revolutionary Guard bases for storing missiles near Esfahan and Shiraz were located, dealing a major blow to the region's military defense systems. Then, according to a senior Israeli official, much later that day at about 10 p.m. in Iran, the supreme Iranian leader, Ali Khamenei, was violently put down by airstrikes from the joint military operation. But that was just the beginning. In light of the attacks and tragedies surrounding the Middle East, Elon's viral take on this conflict blew up just over a week after the Wall Street Journal published an article. This article said a week before that the president was planning to launch a military strike on Iran during private discussions to force them to meet his terms for a nuclear deal. The idea, according to the article, was to force the country to meet its demands by pressure without having to resort to war. Based on official reports, this firm move by the U.S. president was done for the sake of basic safety and security. But Elon Musk believes this isn't true. Instead, he affirms that the president's ordered bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities came only after intense pressure from Israel's prime minister, and not because Iran posed an immediate threat to America. And for many, his reasons were quite convincing. For one, the 2025 airstrike by Trump was the first direct U.S. offensive action against Iranian territory since 1988, an attack that almost led to far worse consequences in the short term. Secondly, the reasons stated by U.S. authorities about Iran's nuclear program being dangerous failed to explain why they chose to take offensive action. He pointed out that the president always promised to avoid foreign wars, but had now acted quickly without exhausting diplomacy. The bombing, he suggested, violated that premise, showing outside influence was involved in the decision. Part of this, as he noted, came from political donors who supported Israel, including Miriam Adelson, whose campaign contributions allegedly gave the leverage needed to affect current policies on critical matters involving the Middle East. According to him, Iran at the time possessed a large collection of ballistic and cruise missiles capable of reaching Israel, with the ability to strike key military and civilian sites quickly. Because of this threat, Israel has invested heavily in layered air defenses, such as the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems, to try to intercept Iran's superior arsenal. With this context, Musk argues that the decision to strike Iran was closely linked to Israel's security concerns. According to him, this alignment influenced critical choices and led to an attack that, he suggests, would not have occurred based purely on American values or policies, as official reports claim. The February 28th attacks were swift and brutal, marked by unplanned casualties and tragedies. To pull off this attack, the U.S. forces and Israeli officials relied on F-35 stealth fighters and Tomahawk cruise missiles launching from the Persian Gulf, with the Israeli F-16S striking with spike missiles at the same time. The idea behind the first phase of the attack was to disable all military ability while avoiding civilian casualties as much as possible. But time would tell whether the attempt to avoid unneeded casualties would succeed, as long after the first explosions, multiple untargeted districts got struck as well. This includes an elementary school in Minyan province in Hormozgan, where over 40 children were allegedly struck down. But the real story begins here. One of the real targets marked for airstrikes was a building adjacent to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's office. And though the supreme official survived, it was clear that Iran's highest leadership wasn't safe from the attacks. Because of this, Iran struck back 20 minutes later, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launching ballistic and cruise missiles aimed at multiple fronts. With one event leading to another, northern Israel was struck as well, quickly becoming a sudden victim of ballistic and cruise missiles launched at it from Iranian territory. These were short-range Fateh 110 missiles accompanied with medium-range Zulfaqar missiles. The latter weapons struck American military bases in their allied headquarters in Bahrain and Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. 10 minutes later, dozens of public alarms went off as residents and officials scrambled to shelters for safety. And just like that, a long multi-front battle had kicked off, with multiple casualties happening at each strike. But that was just the beginning. Just a few hours before the reported demise of Iran's supreme leader, many battles were happening in the skies above. Israel's Iron Dome system was intercepting the Fateh 110 missiles, with the local authorities doing their best to protect civilians and urban infrastructure from harm. Meanwhile, Patriot missile batteries in the Gulf had destroyed multiple Zulfaqar missiles before they could reach their targets on the ground. More attacks occurred in Abu Dhabi, with another missile striking a civilian infrastructure site. By 8 a.m., the sequence continued with surveillance reports telling about more Iranian missile batteries striking Isfahan and Qom. These attacks were specific for two reasons. One, Qom was known as a religious center, but that was later identified as a false front serving as an alibi for the production of more powerful missiles. Isfahan was a location that seemed harmless, but was also secretly used for military research and production. In one fell swoop, Iran struck these locations, showing they were more than ready to respond to threats to military assets. At this point, many were surprised to know that there were diplomatic discussions still going on behind the scenes. The United Nations Security Council had arranged an emergency session led by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, condemning the attacks that had occurred in the past 2 hours as wrong and unnecessary. Many European leaders asked for restraint. Russian leaders called it out as dangerous adventurism with grave consequences, while China demanded an immediate stop to all military actions. But as the hours passed, outcomes only grew worse, with civilians getting increasingly involved in the battle. Dozens of Revolutionary Guard commanders were put down, while hundreds living in neighborhoods and working at school zones were gravely injured. These cases were reported by independent sources, even though U.S. and Israeli officials reported no casualties in all their attacks. After just 4 hours since the first attack, many flights across the Middle East were canceled, oil prices spiked, and Iran vowed to keep retaliating with repeated threats aimed at targeting U.S. and Israeli military positions. By 6 p.m. of that day, the supreme leader was reportedly put down, dozens more were taken out in Iran, many buildings and military bases were destroyed, and civilians were either impacted or placed under immediate threat. But as the world watched anxiously, it became obvious to many that these events were not random, but the result of years of actions that always took things from bad to worse with each step. Strangely enough, some sources claim that these events were vaguely predicted by Elon Musk, and though it was taken down almost immediately, it hinted at a long history that provides clues that would supposedly support his claim. Elon affirms that by assessing these patterns, the evidence becomes quite clear. So without further ado, stay with us as we go back in time and carefully examine the facts as recorded through verified history. America's tensions and controversies with Iran. Based on archives on the Iran hostage crisis, it all began on November 4th, 1979, the day when a group of Iranian students known as the Followers of the Imam's Line seized the U.S. Embassy in Iran and took 66 Americans hostage. 52 of those Americans were held hostage for over 440 days, lasting until January 20th, 1981. This caused deep distrust between both countries, leading the U.S. to freeze all Iranian government assets in the U.S. through an executive order signed 10 days after the abduction. This move by the U.S. government froze many Iranian bank accounts and prevented the country from accessing important resources, including critical investments by Iranian leaders. What made it worse was that none of the efforts by the ongoing American diplomats were taken seriously enough until another country got involved in the situation. This happened on January 19, 1981, under the new Ronald Reagan administration, when the Algerian government came as mediator before the remaining hostages were released. After the situation ended, the United States cut diplomatic ties with Iran and closed the embassies in Washington and Tehran to avoid direct communication between the two governments. But it didn't stop there. As relations broke down, the United States also marked Iran as a sponsor of terrorism in 1984, allowing sanctions and restrictions on all economic, military, and cultural interactions. The sanction effectively made it normal to keep Iran away from international markets, and another one followed by the U.S. Congress in 1995, formally banning most trades and investments involving Iran. The next 21 years would keep the United States adversarial to Iran, with multiple occasions reaching close to war. By the early 2000s, the United States had spoken out openly about the strangely hidden nuclear facilities in Iran and called out Tehran for supporting armed groups in the Middle East that fought American allies. After decades of tension, the United States and Iran made an agreement along with the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China by signing an agreement to limit parts of its nuclear program, reducing Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium to 300 kilograms and a large number of centrifuges to the smallest practical minimum. This became known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and it wasn't about taking away the ability to own nuclear weapons, but limiting ownership and reducing the need to build, keep, and use them. Iran agreed to this treaty in exchange for more freedom to trade and bank with American institutions and those in its allied countries. This agreement was overseen by the United Kingdom Security Council resolution on July 20, 2015, effectively putting what they agreed upon into international law. Part of this law stated that the International Atomic Energy Agency, under the United Nations, now had the right to regularly inspect all nuclear facilities in the country for the next 10 years to make sure Iran keeps its part of the agreement. Enforced during the Obama administration, the former president stated the idea was to prevent Iran from obtaining enough uranium for a nuclear weapon that would make tensions worse. While many at the time saw this as a good thing, the following years would expose the many loopholes in the agreement, and it is believed that these exploits within the rules were what led to the success of Iran's ballistic missile program. These exploits were spotted less than 2 years later by the United States government, so much so that even though the UN authorities openly stated that Iran was faithful to the agreement from 2015, the Trump administration announced in May 2018 that the U.S. would be pulling out of the nuclear agreement.
Today, I want to update the world on our efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
The president argued that the deal was flawed and put no restriction on Iran's current developments in building nuclear weapons, even while keeping the rules. Days after that announcement, the administration ended the waivers that allowed trade with Iran as part of the president's maximum pressure campaign. Iran responded by lifting their compliance with some of the rules mentioned in the agreement. Without permission from the UN authorities tasked with keeping them in check, the Iranian government made moves by expanding its centrifuge projects. Each year, from that moment, one rule after another got broken, but while many hoped tensions would die down and both nations would embrace diplomacy, something unexpectedly catastrophic was about to unfold. The modern attacks. On June 13, 2025, at a time when no one expected an attack, Israel's government launched airstrikes at 3 Iranian nuclear military facilities. The attack was swift and severe, utterly destroying the famous Natanz complex in Iran. In response to being asked why this was necessary, the Israeli Defense Forces said it was done to prevent them from further deviating from the agreement made 10 years ago by developing higher amounts of enriched uranium. Fearing sudden retaliation, the Israel Defense Forces raised nationwide alert levels across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. The Iranian government released a warning that they were ready to respond swiftly, and multiple sources showed how they were planning to go about it. Hezbollah possessed more than 100,000 missiles able to reach northern central Israel, and they also possessed precision-guided systems ranging up to 200 kilometers. Preparing for the worst, the Israeli Air Force reinforced Iron Dome batteries around Tel Aviv and Haifa for the incoming missiles. The dome system used radar detection to track incoming projectiles and was capable of firing interceptor missiles designed to destroy Iran's weapons before they reached the ground. Israel took extra steps by activating more systems like the additional David Sling interceptors, while placing the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 ballistic missile defense systems on June 16. The next day, the Israeli Home Front Command instructed civilians from the north to prepare bomb shelters and reinforced rooms, and hours later, Iranian state officials released another warning, stating that Israel would pay a price for striking first. Because of Israel's sudden action, Iran could potentially activate proxy forces in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq at the same time, leading to a multi-front conflict that would cause even more casualties than expected. Israel was now in deep water. Because of what they did, the region was now more vulnerable to attack than ever before. The only hope they had for redemption was across the Mediterranean, the only power that was able to pull them out of this mess they had gotten into, the United States. All eyes turned to Washington, waiting to see what they would do. Would they watch and focus more on domestic issues that needed attention? Or would they interfere by fighting for the country that supposedly started the crisis? The answer came to light on the evening of June 19th, when officials at the Pentagon in Washington confirmed that American naval assets were working with Israel's defense planners to monitor and share early warning data. Then just 2 days later, on June 21st, the U.S. president held a press briefing at the White House where he revealed that he and other higher-ups were considering taking action against Iran. The attacks would be swift and aerial, but the move had not been fully approved by the authorities. However, this ended up happening in a matter of hours, when the United States Air Force and the United States Navy executed a set of air and missile strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure at the Fordow fuel plant, the Natanz nuclear facilities, and Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center. According to documented assessments, the operation involved B-2 Spirit stealth bombers and high-tech bunker buster bombs designed to penetrate hardened underground environments on the Fordow site near the city of Qom, along with Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from the U.S. Navy submarines in the Persian Gulf, striking surface infrastructure at Natanz and Isfahan. This was done because Israel was an allied nation of the United States, which had now retaliated on its behalf. A simple glance at the situation to most people easily shows this attack would have never happened if the U.S. were more focused on solving domestic issues, rather than getting concerned about Israel's war, which they had started by attacking first. Later that day, Iran's government released a statement that called out America as the main factor behind Israel's sudden attack, promising that the country's armed forces would respond to America's policies. Though Iranian officials claimed the description was superficial, the International Atomic Energy Agency, led by Director General Rafael Grossi, reported on June 29th that they had to restart the whole thing. Knowing this ahead of time, Iran responded to the strikes by launching drone attacks the next day against Al Udeid Air Base near Doha, Qatar. This was a major United States military installation. On top of that, the attack caused drones and ballistic projectiles to enter Qatari airspace. This attack was supposedly justified by Iran's government by stating that both Qatar and the United States were warned ahead of the attack. While mainstream sources didn't cover the actual outcome of that attack, Qatar's government said that Iran's attack was countered with its integrated air defense systems, and so there were no casualties. However, this shows that Iranian forces were willing to cross their borders to make a point to the United States about where they stand with Israel. While Iran's missile and drone headed toward Al Udeid Air Base did not result in reported U.S. casualties, the location of the military base near Doha meant that Iranian forces were able to reach into territory outside Iran's borders in retaliation for the nuclear facility strikes. It dealt an economic blow to both countries, causing global oil prices to jump by more than 2% in a matter of hours. Though things got back to normal in a few weeks, it only happened because observers in London and New York weighed the risk that the conflict could disrupt the shipments through the narrow passage near Iran, where a huge chunk of the world's oil supply gets transported. Going further down the rabbit hole reveals even more surprising details. Naval analysis shows that Iran was well aware of the U.S. airstrikes before they happened, with documents showing that they were making plans to move the nuclear equipment as covertly as possible. Then, on June 21, 2025, Russia's foreign minister wanted to join the fray, stating that the U.S. was risking the integrity of the basic international nuclear monitoring frameworks and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Many took this statement as meaning that if the U.S. wants to mess around by seeing what they could get away with, then other countries, including Russia, would gladly join the fray by striking any land that poses the slightest potential threat to allied nations. For most people, the foreign minister's statement was a stern warning, but it seemed the U.S. wasn't backing out anytime soon, as the next big discussion for diplomacy came when Washington showed advanced preparation for further action in case negotiations failed. Based on all we've covered so far, it seems all of these attacks and public tensions trace back to Israel's attack and the U.S. getting involved in the natural aftermath of sudden aggression. And right when no one hoped for things to get any worse, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to an international forum, implying during the talk that negotiations with Iran can only be considered successful if it ends with an agreement to dismantle all nuclear tools and infrastructure in the region. As far as Netanyahu was concerned, limiting Iran's ability to make nuclear weapons wasn't enough. Israel wanted to take down all Iranian capacity to make nuclear weapons with intentions to end everything nuclear in Iran. Actions taken by Israel's prime minister showed he wouldn't mind drawing in the U.S. military to do it, and he shocked the world by stating the United States had released a second aircraft carrier to the region to attack in case negotiations fail. The old 2015 agreement was essentially dead at this point, and by January 2026, Iran had barred access by inspectors to the nuclear sites that had now been attacked. Tensions were already bad enough that all treaties were null at that point, and by the following month, Iran's foreign ministry officially announced that it had ended its pact. Even though they promised diplomacy back in 2025, all the moves they made seemed to be going in the opposite direction. According to Elon Musk, all of this happened because Israel struck at what they couldn't fight, and the United States got involved in a fight that wasn't started by those they were attacking. The move wasn't to prevent war and promote safety for everyone as the authorities claimed, because if it was, America would have been the one to strike at Iran first, not Israel. Now it seems the U.S. is doing all it can to clean up Israel's mess, and is now doing so by sheer power through America's military. This is the influence driving the U.S. to make big moves it wouldn't have considered if Israel were not involved as an ally. According to Elon, January 2026 proved this beyond a shadow of a doubt, and the battles of February 28th were the direct result. So what do you think? Is Elon right about Israel being the major influence on America's Middle Eastern politics? Or is this just another overblown tweet that rightfully got taken down? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.